Hello, this is Judy again. Lesson 2, part 2. I had to stop and answer a phone call, and then I had to go pick up lunch for my daughter and me and go have lunch with her. So it's been about 2.5 hours since I started part 1, and if I look different, it's just from wear and tear of being out in 102-degree weather, getting gas, getting my car washed, picking up a frozen Dr. Pepper at McDonald's, and then I came on home to finish this part 2 now of lesson 2, finishing up in Genesis. Where we left off was that we were at the genealogy of Adam to Noah and how Methuselah lived longer than anyone else at 969 years. But his father Enoch never died. He just walked away with God. One day God just said, "Hey, we're closer to my house than yours. Let's just go to my house for a while." And Enoch's never come back. A lot of people feel like he'll be one of the two that show up in the end times since he's never died. And so Methuselah had Lamech, and then Lamech was the father of Noah. And that's where this genealogy stops for a while. And we're going to center in Genesis on Noah and who he was. And we see that people had started increasing in numbers on the earth, and they had sons and daughters, and so people got bad. People got really bad, and some Nephilim is mentioned in there, and you might have to look that word up, Nephilim. I'm not sure on a survey I want to get into it because you could have a whole lesson on Nephilim. But anyway, the Nephilim were on the earth, and they were giants. Okay, they were giants, and people got to where they just did what they wanted to do. Anything was a-okay. You know, they didn't, none of them live by morals anymore. And that's how we are. We're born in as sinful people, you know. And Noah, though, was a righteous man. And he was blameless among the people of his time, and he walked with God. And he had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, you probably all know the story of Noah. I won't go into it right now in this survey, but we know that he built an ark to the correct dimensions God told him to, so that it would withstand a flood of 40 days and nights, and it could hold all these animals God's going to send. And so he gave him the dimensions. It was 3 stories, and it had windows at the top so that when they start testing whether the rains come down enough they can open the door, they can send birds out through the windows. So he worked a long time on, he and his 3 sons, on that ark. There'd never been rain on the earth before, so they didn't even know what that meant, but they just knew God said, build the ark, build it to this scale, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. And make a roof for it, and finish the ark within 18 inches of the top. See, he was very specific of what he wanted this ark to be like. Put a door in the side of the ark and make lower, middle, and upper decks. So 3 stories. And I am going to bring flood waters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens. Every creature that has the breath in it, everything on earth will perish. I have worked out genealogies, and my grandson and I did one together. And Noah's dad and grandfather both died within 2 years of this ark being built. So luckily he doesn't have to, his dad won't be locked out of the ark. He's already gone on ahead to heaven. And so that's a good thing, because I used to think, what are the rest of his family's there, and they're beating the door wanting in, and they couldn't let them in. So anyway, you know the story of the ark probably, and I won't go into great details because we're going to come back after the survey and dig into these stories deeper. So God does send a flood onto the earth, and every civilization they've come across has a story of a flood on the earth. So it's pretty obvious we had a flood on this earth that covered the whole earth. And Noah, his 3 sons, their wives, and Noah's wife, all lived on this ark until after the flood, and the flood waters had time to go down, and it settled on Mount Ararat, we are told. And when they came out of the ark, they came out together, the sons and their wives, and all the animals that move along the ground. And he built an altar to the Lord, and they worshiped the Lord. Just imagine knowing you're the only people left on earth. Oh, that would be kind of a lonely feeling, don't you think? And remember, he took enough animals of the kind they ate to eat during the time they were on the ark. A male and female of every other animal, but the food they needed, they had more than one. And then God gave them a rainbow. Yes, the rainbow belongs to God, not to some organization. And God said, every time you see it, you know that I'll never send on earth again a flood that will cover the whole earth. Yeah. As long as the earth endures, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease. We don't go to bed at night worried that the sun's not coming up tomorrow, right? Even though the sun's not coming up, the earth is turning toward it. But in our mind, the sun sets, the sun rises, the moon comes up at night, but they're really stationary, and we're the one that's moving around them. So, and then God gave a few rules, like whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God has God made man. So we're more special to God than his other creations because we are made in his image. Don't you think we kind of like our children more than other people's children? And part of that is because they're made from us. They share our genes, and sometimes they look like us. I have one of my 3 children sort of looks like me. It's a he, but he was a blonde like me. And he had brown eyes, and I had brown eyes when I was younger. When I got pregnant with my daughter, my first child, my eyes turned green like my mother's. But I'd always had brown eyes. And my daughter, though, looks more like my dad's family than I do. I didn't look like my mom and dad that much. But as I get older, I look like my mom. But when I was young, I really didn't see a resemblance between my parents and me. But now, as I get older, I see my mother in me so much. And so my daughter took after my mother, my husband took after my dad's family and his sisters maybe. But she's got her dad's body in that he has real short legs and a long torso, and he's 6'2", and she has short legs and a long torso and is 5'4". So she didn't get his height, but she did get his body torso the way it's proportioned. Now my second son, he got blue eyes like my husband had, and he kind of has curly hair, sort of like his dad has, and he's tall like his dad is, and he's real thin though, like no one else in our family. He's like 6'1" or 2", weighing about 140 pounds. But he marathon runs all the time, so that's part of the reason. But that's why we're special to God, because He sees Himself in us, in looks. We resemble Him, and we have a soul. But we're born as sinners, and He's never sinned. So that puts a kink kind of in that a little bit. Well, so the sons of Noah then have their genealogy, and they're called the Japhetites, the Shemites, or the Semites, and what was the other one? Hamites, Shemites, and Japhethites, and the genealogy will be traced through the Semites, and that's when people say, "Oh, they are racist, they're anti-Semitic, they're against the son of Noah's Shem's and progeny, people that came from him." That's what it means to be against the anti-Semite. Is that. So they separated and went different places to start their families so that they're not sharing everything together. And the region where different ones lived is given in this chapter so that you kind of can follow as they spread out across the world. Then we come to the Tower of Babel. And we know that it was probably in Babylon, right, where later the Israelites or the Judah people are taken in bondage in Daniel's time. But, of course, that wasn't a great kingdom then because it's just these people, right? But the newest people then that come after the flood, they start settling in Babylon. And why is Babylon such a area to always be fought over? Is because there's two main rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And it says people on the internet are always saying that the armies to attack Israel will come across the Euphrates and it will dry up. So the Euphrates has always served as sort of a boundary of protection against people to the east, against the Jews, because you have the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers right there kind of guarding the way. And so they settled there, a bunch of them did, and they started building a tower. Now I image it in my mind as like a step tower going up and up and up, because we know that so many of the tall things built back in those days were pyramid type buildings, and they could build blocks or cut out blocks and stack them like that, and that way they could still climb up the different levels. So that's just my image of it, is that this Tower of Babel that was going up to heavenward was probably a pyramid. Now that's nothing to prove that. This is just my thoughts. And so God got angry that they're trying to be gods themselves and build something that will get them to heaven without a sacrifice for their sins. And so he confuses their languages. Yeah, it's real hard to help build the house together if you neither one can communicate. You get kind of, I need it to be 16 feet. How do you tell that to someone who doesn't speak anything but Greek, or someone who only speaks Hebrew, or someone who only speaks Spanish? They couldn't work together, so they started splitting up and moving away, settling with other people that spoke their languages in other places. And hopefully they learned their language to quit building towers to God, to heaven, because God doesn't like it. But the people, they still didn't worship God the way they should have, and they didn't remain true to him. So God looked around the world, and down into where the Tigris and Euphrates came together, God found a righteous man, and his name was Abram. And God called him he said, I want you to move where I'm going to move you. Take your family and move. And I'm going to make you a great nation. Now, this guy was no spring chicken. He was pretty old. And he said, I don't have any children. Sarai, my wife, and I, we don't have any children. How are you going to make us a great nation? Yes, I have some servants, and I have a lot of animals and livestock, and I have a nephew and a father. But how are you going to do that? And God just says, trust me. Trust me. Just move. Start going north at first, and then I'll give you directions where to go from there. And when they got to Haran, no, he set out from Haran. Went the way God told him. Oh, I think I got that all mixed up. Let's see. Haran was Abram's brother, okay? And Terah was their father. And he became the father of Nahor, Haran, and Abram at age of 70. So Abram was like a triplet. Yeah. Haran and Nahor were his twin brothers. And so that's how God can populate the world again quickly, giving twins and triplets. And so Terah was their father, and Haran died in Ur of the Chaldees. And that's where Abram was when God told him to move, Ur of the Chaldees. So they moved up to Haran, and then Terah dies. They stay there some years, and then God tells them, pick up now and go west. So they go west, and they're going to what we know today as Israel. And so Abram follows God's directions, and we know that his wife causes him to take one of her servants and have a child with him because she doesn't think she could possibly bear a child at her old age. She's older than me. And so she thought, no way could I have a baby. So if we're going to have this promised son, you're going to have to sleep with my maidservant. And they did have a baby. And the baby was a boy, but God said, that's not the child of promise. You took things into your own hands. And so Sarai does have a baby, and in her old age, and Abram was really old, and God changed their names from that to Abraham and Sarah. Now, his son Ishmael, by Hagar the maidservant, God, when Sarah kicked Hagar out, Hagar and Ishmael went a different direction into a desert area, and God promised her that her son would live, and he would have a nation of his own. He just won't be God's nation. It won't be the one special jewel. And so to this day, the Ishmaelites and the Israelites do not get along. And that's what we see in the Middle East all the time, is they both claim to be heirs of Abraham. One is illegitimate and one was legitimate. So they have Isaac. And Isaac's name was because Sarah laughed when she's told you're the one that's going to have the baby. And so Isaac means to laugh, I believe. And then when Isaac grows up, his dad sends a servant to get him a wife among his own people back up in Haran. And his brother Nahor, that was still alive, had children, and he was supposed to bring a wife from there. And he ends up bringing a wife for Isaac. During this time, though, that Abraham was alive, his nephew Lot went one direction away from Abraham so they could have separate living places. And he went to a place in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah. And when God came to tell Abram at that time, that his wife was going to have a baby, it's going to be their baby, that's the promised baby. He also told him that he's fixing to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because it was so evil, so very evil. And Abram, he makes... I don't know if you call it a deal, but he'll say, well, if you find this many people there that are righteous, would you still destroy the city? No. If I find that many, I won't. Well, what about, then he cuts it down again. What if you find this many, or how many if you find this many, until finally it comes down to pretty much if he can just find Lot and his family, they're going to live and everybody else is going to be destroyed. And so that happens. Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed, and Lot is saved with his daughters. His wife looked back and was turned to a pillar of salt. And then they had the birth of Isaac. And then Abraham is tested, and the death of Sarah, and then Isaac married Rebekah. And Rebekah and Isaac had two sons, Jacob and Esau, twins. See, I said God used twins, and triplets to populate the world. But God was going to bless Jacob instead of Esau. He was going to continue that line that he's leading up to Jesus with through Jacob. Now, Jacob is not a hero to us. We see he was just a man. He made some really bad decisions in his life, like tricking his brother out of his blessing from his father, tricking his brother out of his birthright, having to run away to keep his brother from killing him. And but then he get tricked in return by the woman that he loves, father. He wants to work for her. He wants to marry Rachel. And the father says, work 7 years, take care of my sheep, and at the end of the 7 years, you can marry her. And so he worked the 7 years, had the wedding, got to the wedding chambers. She took off her headdress, and he had married her sister. Oh, he was angry. He had been tricked just like he had tricked his dad and brother. And so he worked another 7 years before he could get Rachel. He ended up having 12 sons in all, and only 2 of them coming from Rachel. And they had to wait a long time, where the other side of the family was growing and growing and growing. And there was a daughter in there too. But they had 12 sons, and those are the 12 tribes of Judah that we read about coming out of Egypt, going into the promised land hundreds of years later. They started keeping records among themselves of which brother they came from while they were in Egypt. And how did they get to Egypt? Well, we know that Jacob came back to the promised land with his family, and Rachel, Leah, their boys. And in the meantime, God changed his name to Judah. To Israel. He was changed to Israel. Judah was one of his sons, okay? And so he sent his favorite son. You should not have favorite sons, but he had a favorite son. Once they got settled, he sent his favorite son, named Joseph, who he kept at home, who he'd given a beautiful coat to, out to check on the brothers who had been taking care of sheep many, many miles away from home, to make sure they were doing okay. But when Joseph approached them, they saw him coming, and they were jealous of him. Are we usually jealous of one of our siblings if we think our parents like them better? Well, they were human, and they wanted to kill him. They decided to just kill him. But one brother spoke up and said, no, let's not kill him. Just throw him in a well. So they threw him in a well, and that brother went off to do something, and while he was gone, a Egyptian tribe of merchantmen came by, and they bought Joseph from them and took him back to Egypt with them. And they sold him into bondage to Potiphar. And he worked for Potiphar, but Potiphar's wife was working to get Joseph into bed, and Joseph wouldn't do it, so she lied and said that he had tried to rape her, and so Joseph got thrown in prison, and he was there for several years. During that time, the king of the country was called a Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh had a bad dream, and he didn't know what it meant. He had also had his cupbearer and his baker thrown into jail, and both had a dream, and Joseph had interpreted that one of them was going to lose his head and the other one was going to be reinstalled in the king's service. And sure enough, that happened, and he asked the one that got reinstalled to remember that so he could get out of jail. Well, the God never thought of Joseph again until the king had a dream, and he needed somebody to tell him what it meant, and none of the wise men could. And so they said to him, well, the cupbearer remembered Joseph, and he says, there's a guy in jail who told me I was going to get my job back, and I got my job back. Maybe he could tell you what your dream means. So the Pharaoh has Joseph cleaned up and brought to him, and he tells him the dream, and Joseph prays about it, and God shows him what it means, and he says, this is what it means. And it means you're going to have 7 years of famine, and at first you're going to have 7 years of plenty. Everything's going to grow really, 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 really good. And then you're going to have 7 years of famine when there's no rain and nothing will grow. And the king said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do about that? And Joseph said, well, this is what I think you should do. You should start collecting food from all the people during the 7 good years and store it away. And that way you'll have it when the 7 lean years come, and you'll save your people. What an awesome plan. I put you in charge, the Pharaoh said. So Joseph got elevated from the jail to second in command of the whole country of Egypt, one of the most powerful nations in the world at that time. And so he started collecting all the food as it's being harvested and storing it. And when the famine came, all the nations around were having the famine. They started coming in and bringing gold and silver to buy food for their families. And lo and behold, those brothers, the very ones who sold him to the Egyptians, came to buy food. You'll have to read it to find out, or come back when we go in depth, to find out what all Joseph, how he tested them to see if their hearts had changed. And their hearts had changed. They regretted selling him. They regretted lying to their father. They regretted seeing their father mourn for Joseph all these years. And they even protected Joseph's full brother, Benjamin, and tried to get him to be able to stay home and never come to Egypt. In the end, after they passed the test that their hearts had changed, Joseph revealed himself to them. They didn't recognize him because he was many years older. He had Egyptian hair, which usually meant shaved head except for a little pigtail coming out the back. And, they hadn't seen him since he was a boy. And now he's a grown man, second in command of the country, and speaking Egyptian. So, yeah, they had no way of knowing that could possibly be their brother. But when they did, they were scared. They were scared what he was going to do to them. But he told them, God put me here. God had a reason so I can save our family. And they went home, got their father, got their little brother, got all their servants, got all their animals, and they moved lock, stock, and barrel to Egypt. And Pharaoh was so indebted to Joseph that he gave Joseph's family their own land on another part of the country. And Joseph married, and he had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And when Genesis ends, it's at the death of Joseph. His dad had died years before. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his father's family. He lived 110 years and saw the 3rd generation of Ephraim's children. Also, the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knee. So he got to see his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised us on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That would be his dad, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather. Abraham was his great-grandfather. And Joseph made the sons of Israel, which is Jacob, swear on oath and said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. And wait till they eventually leave Egypt, and you will see they do take Joseph's bones. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt, probably like King Tut's was, so that it doesn't rot away. And that's where Genesis ends. And that's where today's lesson will end. And then in lesson 3, we will start Exodus. Okay? It's an exciting time, Exodus is. But so far, I think Genesis has just been filled with so many great stories. And of course, I didn't touch on every story. And when we do Genesis slower, in depth, you'll hear all the great stories. And some of them, you'll be surprised they're in the Bible. It will shock you. Yeah, if you're not a Bible studier as of today, if you're new to the Bible and you don't know all the stories, when you get deep into Genesis, you're going to be shaking your head like, Oh my goodness, I can't believe these people acted like that. Now we understand today. You will see that sins of today were being acted out way 6,000 years ago. I would like to show you some little hand signals. There's this thing called Walk Through the Bible with hand signals, so that it helps you remember things. And so I'm not going to do all of Genesis for you, but I'm going to show you how it starts. It starts out with the creation, fall, that's Adam and Eve eating, creation, fall, and then the flood. Just go right into the flood of Noah, which was 8 generations after Adam and Eve. So we're skipping a bunch of Cain and Abel and Seth and all that. So creation, fall, flood, and then the nations come out of the flood and start separating, going different places, speaking different languages. So we go nations, showing that they're going across the maps, right? And this happened 6,000 years ago. Okay, so creation, fall, flood, nations, 6,000 years ago. And then we'll go on into the next steps. Will take us up the Tigris and Euphrates into Abraham and Ur with his wife Sarai, and we'll work our way over there. But for now, study those steps that I just gave you, and we can add some every lesson. How about that? Okay, see you at lesson 3. Thanks for coming on, and please like and share. That helps me get distributed to the rest of the world, and I really, really want people in foreign countries who don't know the Bible to find this. Because sometimes when all they find are preachers teach using Christianese, Christian words like pre-tribulation, post-tribulation, those kind of things. I'm teaching this as if I'm teaching it to a child, which I used to teach at Bible Heritage Christian School, and I taught Sunday school for over 40 years to children. I'm teaching this as if I'm doing it to a child, because if you're a new believer in Christ, or you're just looking for Christ, you're afraid to open the Bible, you've heard of it, but you're not sure how it's put together, I want you to learn it from someone who will teach it in regular language that you can understand if you understand English. I can't teach it in Swahili or any other language. I can only teach it in English. But having traveled to different countries of the world, I know that most of the countries do speak English also. So hopefully you can. And I look forward to being able to tell you more about this awesome book, the Bible of God. It is so wonderful. See you next time. Goodbye.